Hello, world. Welcome to the Web Accessibility live stream. With ourselves, we have Clifford here. Um, Welcome, Clifford. Really nice having you at our community. He is a React Native developer, and he has given lots of talks on web accessibility, in which he has developed significant expertise after getting interested in it. Really happy to have you, Clifford. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Param, for inviting me for this talk. So, yeah, my name is Clifford Ouma. I am the Google Developer Student Club lead at Moi University in Kenya. I'm also part of the GitHub Campus Expert community. Uh, I think today we'll be doing an in-depth overview of web accessibility. Like, what is web accessibility? Why should we like consider web accessibility, and how can we get started with web accessibility? So yeah, I think I can share my screen, but I'm right.
Yes, yes, please do.
Okay, let me share. Okay, you tell me when you can see it.
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, good. So I'll present my slides. Yeah, so yeah, as I said, today we're talking about web accessibility. A little bit in depth about me. I'm a sophomore student, which is basically just a second year student. I'm a junior front end developer, and I've worked with React Native for a while, more than a year. I'm a user experience design and training. I'm currently exploring different parts of user experience design and have great interest in inclusive design and user experience research. I'm a community leader, as I said. I'm the lead of Google Developer Student Club at Moi University, and I'm also part of GitHub Campus Expert. And lastly, I love sharing and learning because sharing and learning gives like great opportunity to help foster growth among others. These are my socials on LinkedIn. It's just Clifford Ouma, and Twitter it's Clifford underscore Ouma. Okay, so I'll start off with some statistics, and one of the statistics is 15% of the world's population is face some kind of disability, and in even deeper statistics, 1 in 8 people have one form of impairment. So one thing I talk about disabilities, people usually take disability being permanent. People usually focus much on permanent disabilities like blindness, and other types of disabilities. But one thing with disabilities and impairment, it can be permanent, it can be temporary, it can be situational. So permanent is irreversible, temporary is due to a certain event that caused it, but it is reversible. Situational is due to a certain situation someone is in. So, like this is an example. So, in terms of touch, there's people with one arm, that's a permanent disability. There are people with an arm injury. Let's say you played soccer and you injured your arm. Like it's temporary because it will take time for you to heal, but you will heal and you'll be able to use both your arms. And there's situational, a new parent who's carrying a baby. So they won't be able to use both arms because like they're holding the baby. And yeah, these are other different types based on different senses: hearing, seeing, and speaking. Okay, so what is equity? What is equality? And what is accessibility? So, equity, I'd say, is being fair and impactful. Sorry for the typo, but equity is just about being fair and like impactful, meaning you give to those who really deserve. Equality is about giving the same proportion. like dividing it equally among people. So if it's like attention, if it's resources, you divide it equally among people. If it's like, let's say I had 3 bananas and I was dividing to 3 people, I'd give each of them a banana. Web accessibility is just about creating an inclusive practice where you ensure that there are no barriers preventing like people with different kinds of disabilities from accessing your site. And web accessibility usually leans towards equity more than equality, because why I say equity is because people with different kinds of impairment and different kinds of disabilities, they they require more support because they don't have the same ability as other people. So they require more support and more help to be able to have a good user experience while using your site. So that's why I say web accessibility and equity are usually tied up together. Okay, so a visual illustration of the difference between equality and equity. So if you see like in the first half of the photo, we can see there's an adult, a child, and someone on a wheelchair. So equality is where they're given equal stacks of boxes. Like they all have the equal stack of boxes. The adults, because due to height advantage, they're able to see, and even the stack of box helps them even see more. The child, they can barely see because they height, but they can still see. Then the person on the wheelchair cannot see, despite being given equal access. Now, equality changes things because equality now comes in and says, okay, we need to give the person who requires more assistance needs to be given like more resources. So as you see, the person in the wheelchair has the highest stack and is able to see. Then coming to the child because of height has two stacks and also able to see. And the adult because they have the same amount of they have the height, they're also able to see even without like the stack of boxes. So like that explains the main difference between equity and equality. So accessibility is usually referred to as A A11Y, and basically it's just because there are 11 letters between A and Y. So sometimes you might hear this term. Sometimes people say accessibility. Sometimes people say A11Y. And yeah, next I'll talk about assistive technologies. So like, what are assistive technologies? So basically, to put it simple, assistive technologies are different kinds of ways that were created to help people with different disabilities be able to like get equal access. Take the analogy of the box. Like the person with the wheelchair had the highest stack. Like that can be an assistive technology. It helps them have almost equal experience as the adult who had the height and was able to see. So yeah, that's basically about assistive technologies. People always know screen readers as the only assistive technology, but there's so many. There's so many assistive technologies. Even the ones I've listed here it's not a complete list. So screen readers are the main form of assistive technology, and they're usually used by people with either low vision or people who are non-sighted. They can't see. Uh, those who are visually impaired. Another type of assistive technology is hearing aids. So hearing aids they help people be able to hear more clearly, and are usually used by people who are partially deaf. Or yeah, it amplifies the sound and enables them to hear well. Then we have adaptive switches. So adaptive switches can be of different kinds. The common one are keyboard switches, and they're mainly used by people with motor disabilities. By motor disabilities, I mean people who don't have like the agility that young people have. Take for example, someone who reaches their 80. Like either they have like trembling and can't maintain good stability while moving or accessing a keyboard, or they can't like move as fast as required. Like they have some form of impairment in terms of their motor skill, their motor ability. Other types are usually computer software and hardware assistive technologies, and these include voice recognition programs, screen readers that are maybe software kind, like for example, there's uh, Apple VoiceOver on Safari, and yeah, the different kinds of software and hardware that come to assist people with impairment, just to give them a good access to your websites. So, what's today's agenda? So, what we'll cover? So, today's agenda, I'll start you off by accessibility guidelines, and yeah, accessibility guidelines used in the web. I'll tell you more about them. I'll tell you like the differences and such. I'll also tell you HTML's role in accessibility. Uh, what role does HTML, yes, the normal HTML, have in accessibility? We'll go over the role of document structure in accessibility, and also discuss on accessible navigation in the web. And lastly, we'll look at accessible lists, tables, form, and other media. So to start off by the accessibility conformance guidelines that are there in the web. So how can we achieve web accessibility? We've talked a lot about accessibility, saying it gives, it removes barriers and enables people to be able to access your website quite well. But how can we achieve it? So we're in luck because the people who saw this coming and sat down and created good guidelines that can help guide us whenever we're creating set of rules that enable us to like create our websites and know that it's accessible. So there are two major conformance guidelines in the web space. So there is Web Content Accessibility Guideline, which is WCAG. That's how I pronounce it. There might be different variations. And we have Section 508. So these are the two main accessibility conformance guidelines. So for Section 508, I'll start off with Section 508. So Section 508 is just a set of rules to ensure accessibility, but mainly used by federal websites in the US. So by federal, I mean government websites that give government access to maybe citizens in the US. So Section 508, it's mainly tailored for federal websites, and yeah, it just gives, it ensures that federal websites give equal access to every person so that they can be able to access government services. Yeah, and yeah, it ensures accessible access to government services, and yeah, you can read more about it on the link that I provided there. Now, it's usually not quite as popular, but the most popular guideline used in the web is Web Content Accessibility Guideline. I've put 2.1 because that is the latest version that's being used. So the same way you have HTML5, CSS3, uh, and different versions of ECMAScript. So yeah, it's just the same thing with this guideline. So this is the main version that's being used. One thing to note is that everything in Section 508 is in Web Content Accessibility Guideline, WCAG. So once you meet WCAG requirements, you're already meeting Section 508 requirements. Now, for WCAG, as I said, it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and yeah, it was created by W3C. For people who've been in the web for long, they know W3C is the body that governs things to do with the web, and it contains everything in Section 508, as I said. It's universal. It's universal such that you can apply it anywhere, regardless of where you are and what you're creating. As long as it's for the web, it's universal and helps. So it operates under four major principles, and these principles are, it should be perceivable. It's usually called the POUR principle, POUR. So it should be perceivable. People should be able to see like whatever you're creating. It should be operable, meaning it's easy to use and operatable, and people can easily use your website. It should be understandable. There should be like, it should be in good language and easy to understand so that any person can easily understand whatever the content you're passing through in the website, and it should be robust. It should be accessible by different platforms. Uh, it usually has three levels. You can say levels, just like the way you have your game, your games, the games that you play. Maybe they have like level one, level two, level three. So for WCAG 2.1, it has three levels in it. So there's the level A, there's the level double A, and the level triple A. Yeah, just that way. Level A, level double A, and level triple A. So for these three levels, level A is the least level in accessibility. It's the least way you can make your site accessible. So the guidelines under level A, like whatever rules that are under level A, are the least way you can make your site accessible. And it's a requirement for every website. Like every website should meet level A guidelines because it's the least way you can make your site accessible. Unfortunately, not every website meets level A requirements. Level double A has everything that is in level A and has additional guidelines. So it's slightly better, just the same way you play your game. The beginner challenge was easy, then you go to medium, and it's slightly harder than even the beginner. So level double A has everything in level A, and it has also uh, additional guidelines. And level triple A is also the same. It has everything level A and level double A and has more additional guidelines. So level triple A is the highest level of accessibility that you can reach. Like it's when you reach level triple A, it's like the highest pinnacle that you can reach in accessibility. So yeah, general info and terms. So I'd like to give like a good context of how I'll be giving my talk. So I'll be referring to WCAG 2.1 guidelines. Uh, the guidelines are just the rules contained in Web Content Accessibility Guideline version 2.1. And I'll be referencing them based on their level. I'll be saying, okay, level A guideline talking about this, level triple A guideline talking about this. Now, in this talk, I'll focus on level A and level triple A, level double A, sorry. Level A and level double A. I won't touch on guidelines on level triple A. I just want to keep it simple and understandable to everyone. So I'll also be referencing different forms of disabilities. Whenever I give like a tip on how to improve disability, no, how to improve your accessibility, I'll be saying who it benefits. I'll be giving that also. So the first part, as I said, I talk about accessibility and I said the role of HTML in accessibility. So HTML, the current HTML version is HTML5. Uh, and yeah, HTML helps create the information architecture of a site. What do I mean by information architecture? I mean the structure of your content and the structure of the document. Like every content of a web page is usually contained in HTML. It's not the CSS, it's not the JavaScript. The HTML is the one that contains the content and it contains like the document structure, like the code structure. So it creates the document object model, uh, which is just like an outline of all the content that you have, like which one contains everything, just moving down to the specific components in your HTML. It defines the piece of content, whether it's a paragraph, whether it's a heading. Yeah, it helps define that. And the main important thing is that it is semantic. What do I mean by semantic? By semantic, I mean it has meaning. This is the main part of HTML, and it's what makes HTML the most important part of web accessibility. So HTML is one of the most important parts of web accessibility because it's semantic, it gives meaning. So as you know, in HTML5 they introduced the semantic tags, and yeah, that's why we use them. It gives more meaning. So I'll be talking about two things regarding HTML and accessibility. There is structure, and this structure is divided into two. There is document structure and content structure. These are two different things, but they're all contained in your HTML. So one, let's start with document structure. So for document structure, it's the code that you have in your HTML, the tags that you're using, the landmarks that you're using, the sections that you have. Like it's just the order of your code, like how you've written it. If it's Visual Studio Code you're using, like what you see when you enter Visual Studio Code, the tags that you're using, the landmarks, the sections that you're having. That is the document structure. But coming to the other side of the coin, there's the content structure. Now, the content structure is the human readable information. Why do we create websites? We create websites to pass some information. If it's a business website, we're passing information about our business. Regardless of whatever the website is, we're always passing information. We don't want to show people, like, okay, I've just written a bunch of paragraph tags, or I've written a bunch of H1 tags. You can see it here. No, there's content inside that H1, there's content inside that paragraph, and that is what we're communicating to people. So, as I said, there are two sides of the coin. There's the document structure, which is the code that you write, and there's the content structure, which is the information. How good is it? Does it have a logical flow? Like, how have you aligned your content? How good is it structured? That is the content structure. The document structure, how good are you writing your code? So those are the two types of structures that are contained in HTML. Now, we'll move to improving accessibility in your structure, or rather, improving accessibility using your HTML. So I'll be giving different kinds of ways you can improve them. We'll be having a second part of this session, which will be doing the live coding. But for now, I want to give good context and solid foundation on accessibility. So the first point is use a valid doc type. So the doc type is usually the first part of your HTML. And yeah, people don't usually understand, like, why do we put the doc type? People just put it because it's required. But the doc type usually helps in that it gives proper parsing of your document. Like the assistive technologies, for example, a screen reader won't be able to, like, visually see. It accesses your code, your document structure. That's what a screen reader accesses, not the content structure, but the document itself, the document structure. So giving it a valid doc type, it's able to parse and understand your code much better. So always put a valid doc type. Uh, it's usually the first part of your HTML document, and that's why it's really important. Assistive technologies will be able to understand your code quite well and communicate with the same clarity to the person using the assistive technology. The second point is use a language attribute. So the language attribute is it's usually lang, and it's usually like an attribute in the HTML tag. Like once you open your HTML tags, that's usually the lang. Now, people usually ignore it because, as you know, it will never throw up an error. Like you never see on the console, okay, you failed to put the lang attribute. Uh, Most accessibility rules don't throw up errors on the console, which I think should be changed. But it's important to put a lang attribute because once you have a language attribute, you're able to tell it, like, which language is the website written on. You might write it in Spanish, you might write it in Italian, it might be plain English, but it's important to give it the language. Why? Screen readers usually read, they literally read the content of your web page to the person listening. So once you give it the right language attribute, you give it the right language, it can be able to, like, better pronounce the 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 words in your website. So for language attributes, they usually use the ISO codes. I think English is N, Spanish is ES. So yeah, it's you can search up the ISO code to know, like, the right one that you can use, but it's really important to put the language attribute. Next thing is set the correct viewport. As I said, accessibility, it's about, like, removing barriers. So setting the correct viewport, it improves the responsiveness of your website. And when it improves the responsiveness of your website, people can be able to access it from different devices. So once they are able to access it from different devices, like you've improved the accessibility of your website already. As much as it's not geared towards people with disabilities, but still responsiveness is still a major part of accessibility. Also, you can use relative CSS units. What do I mean by relative CSS units? They're usually the RAM and the M. So they're usually important because they're able to scale. Now, for relative CSS units, there is a guideline tied to it. So there's a level A guideline talking about resize text. So for this guideline, it says that your website should be able to resize text depending on the user. So how do they resize text? People with low vision who can't see clearly, who can't see your website clearly, they might want to increase the font size. They can increase it in the browser. So the website should be able to scale accordingly once they increase the font size. Now, it's good to use relative units because relative units will always scale. They're not fixed. So there'll be a good scaling. Once they increase or decrease, they'll be able to do it quite well in your whole website. So that's why it's really important. Instead of pixel units, use RAM or M, whichever fits you best, just to be able to scale. Also, it helps meet, there's another guideline, a level A guideline, increase text by 200. So this guideline, it says someone should be able to increase the text of your website by 200% before it breaks down the structure and the order of things. So you don't have to test it out till 200%. Basically, using relative CSS units will be able to fix this for you. So it's important to use relative CSS units because you'll be able to reach these two guidelines, which are level A requirements. And by level A, I told you, it's required that every website meets level A guidelines. And finally, another point in improving your accessibility of the structure is using landmark tags. By landmark tags, I mean things like the header, the section, the footer, such tags. So using them helps meet level double A guideline of info and relationships, where info and relationships basically states that any visual cues that you give to your website should be able to be seen in the document structure. What do I mean by this? You can style something to look like a header, but you not use the header tag. Let's say you've used just a div. People who have vision will be able to see and will be able to notice, oh, this is the header of your website. But what about that person coming in with a screen reader? They won't be able to see and know that this is a header. So this guideline states that any visual cues that you give to your website, like whatever you style to look somehow in a certain way, it should be able to be semantic also. You should use the right tag for it also. Yeah. So you'll be able to see this guideline coming up more than 100 times in this session because it's really important and it's a level double A guideline. So that was all about document and content structure. Now we move to lists. There are three types of lists. We have the ordered, the unordered, and the definition lists. The ordered usually have like they're numbered either by Arabic numerals 1, 2, 3, 4, or Roman numerals. Uh, yeah. The unordered lists, they're usually bulleted. The bullets can be different. They can be like arrows, pointy arrows. They can be like dots or squares or circles, depending on how you style them. Then definition lists, they usually give like more context to a certain term. So they like define a certain term. So using the right type of lists improves the semantic of your web page and also meets the same guideline, level double A on info and relationships. It improves the semantics. What do I mean by this? When you use an unordered list, it communicates more to to the person with the screen reader, they can be able to know, okay, this is an unordered list. It's not like ordered like the others, one, two, three. And like any visual cues that you give to, to make it an unordered list, once you use the right type of list, you meet info and relationships, because any visual cues that you provided by CSS, anything that you've styled, is also conveyed the same to non-sighted users through semantics. So by semantics, it's meaning. So they'll be able to also know the same thing. So the same information is shared between sighted users who have used CSS, and also shared to non-sighted users who will see it through semantics. Now, next we look at accessible navigation. So what do I mean by navigation first? So navigation is the ability for users to be able to fluidly and easily move through your website, top to bottom, bottom to top, and like find anything within your website. Now, navigation is usually a big pitfall when it comes to accessibility, because many people usually don't meet navigation guidelines when they're creating their websites, which is why it's really important to know like how can you improve your guidelines. And as I said, there will be a second part of this where we'll be able to do it live with you and you'll be able to follow along. So navigation lists, navigation links that you have, links to your home page, to your about page, should be in an unordered list. Why do I insist this? Okay, people usually do this normally, but this is the reason why you do it. So once you put it in an ordered list, it becomes easier for people with screen readers to navigate them. Screen readers usually give easy access and easy shortcuts to move through lists. So once you put it in a list, it's easy for them to like move through top, bottom of your navigation links, bottom to top. So they're able to fluidly move through your navigation links. Now, no images in no images of text. Never use images of text. Images of text, if it's maybe an image having a certain text, never use it. Why? Because first of all, you won't meet the level A guideline of resize text. Why? Because once you increase, as I said, low vision users usually resize the text of your website to be able to see things clearly. So if they resize your website and you've used like an image of text, the image won't resize accordingly. The image will remain the same. So first of all, you will not make that requirement. Now, secondly, you'll be going against another level A guideline of images of text. So this level A guideline of image of text states that you should never use images of text. You should never use images of text. Why? Because people using screen readers will never read text in images. They'll be able to see, okay, it's an image, but they won't know what's written on the image. I think later we'll look at alt text and how we can fix that using an alt text. Also, another thing with regards to navigation is you need to have a consistent look and order in your navigation. Another typo, sorry for that. So this meets a level A guideline on consistent navigation. What do I mean by consistent navigation? So this guideline states that in your different web pages, you're having a website with different pages. There's the about, there's the home page, there's the contact us page, and all of them usually have like a nav bar, or like in the header, there's the nav bar. So it needs to have a consistent look. It needs to just be the same throughout your web pages, and the order of your navigation links needs to be the same. If you are starting with home in the first page, you shouldn't put home in the last part, in the second page. Why do we do this? First of all, it helps people who are non-sighted users, because they'll be able to see, because they usually take the same way they navigated through the first page, they'll use it in the second page. So it's usually confusing when they go there, then they find, okay, the first navigation link here is contact us, while the first one was home. Secondly, there are people with cognitive disabilities, so it makes it easier for them to like understand your website and be able to move through your website. Uh, Another guideline is another tip to improving accessibility of your navigation is uh, provide various means of finding content in your website. What do I mean by this? There's a level double A guideline, not a level A now, but a level double A guideline of multiple ways. So, multiple ways states that there should be more than one way for people to be able to search content in your website, to be able to find content in your website. The normal way would be to scroll and to look for it, or using a screen reader to move through your website looking for it. But you can always use something like a search bar. That's another way. You can provide like a search bar so they can be easily search for things in your site, and that meets level double A guideline of multiple ways. Instead of the search bar, maybe you're building a static site and search bar is like really complex. You can always add a sitemap. And what do I mean by sitemap? So a sitemap is usually like a simple structure explaining how your website is structured. Structure. Okay, it's just a simple way of showing the structure of your website, how you've planned out your website. You can do this using unordered lists, just nesting them in each other so that people can easily access your site. And yeah, the sitemap usually helps also in SEO, search engine optimization. It helps make your site easily identified. So that's also another benefit. Despite helping people with disabilities to navigate through your site quite easily, it also improves the SEO of your website. Now, still in navigation, there is must keep a consistent identification of your navigation. So there's a guideline level A of consistent identification, which states that different components in the website should have the same functionality that work the same. They should be identified the same way. Like take for example a search button. If in your home page the same search button that still searches, if you label it as search, in about you shouldn't label it as go, or in another page labeling it as a different thing. It should be identified the same way throughout your different pages, because people using screen readers will see, okay, in the homepage it's search, but they go to the about page, they hear go, they'll think it's a different button because they can't visually see, they can't just see, okay, it's just placed the same place and it's just the same button. They can't see that. So labeling it the same way, it helps make life easy for them, and they're able to identify it quite easily throughout your multiple pages. Apart from that, have a descriptive link text. By link text, I mean like the text within your link, and this helps meet level A guideline. Remember, level A guidelines are a must for every website. So level A guideline of link purpose. So which requires that the text in your link should be sufficient to describe the link itself. Like it, when someone just reads the text, they shouldn't be able even to, they shouldn't need any more information. They should have like all the information that they need, and they should be able to know what your text, what your link does, and maybe even where it will take them. Now, sometimes we have this main problem, the read more links. So you've always seen it in a number of news sites. Read more, read more, read more, read more. It's a number of blogs you're putting there, then you put like some introductory part of the blog, then there's a button down there, read more. Now, it's usually a bad label to use, and it's usually it doesn't meet level A guideline of link purpose. But yet we still see people using it. Why? Because sometimes they use it and still meet this requirement, because you can use visually hidden text. What do I mean by visually hidden text? Visually hidden text are like they just text that's visually hidden from users who can see. It's just wrapping a span around extra information that you're giving to your link and styling it with CSS to make it invisible to people who see. So for you, you'll see a read more button, but maybe they've provided more context. Read more on our products, read more on this blog, read more on certain thing, but they don't want to change the look and feel. So they keep it still as read more. So you can always use visually hidden text if you don't want to change the look and feel of your website, but still provide accessibility, because visually hidden text won't be hidden to screen readers and to other assistive technologies. They'll be able to find it. So it's a win-win. You keep your site the way you want it to look, but still provide good accessibility to people who use assistive technologies. And finally, the last part, the last tip I'd give on navigation is using a skip link. So, what is a skip link? A skip link is a link, a shortcut link to the main content of your website. It's basically just a link where if you click, it takes you to the main content of your website. So, like providing a skip link, so first of all, it helps people find uh, content on your website, meaning it meets the other guideline uh, of multiple ways. Apart from that, it meets another double A guideline of bypass blocks, which just states that people should be able to skip repeated content on your website. Now, screen readers usually go step by step through our website. So you can imagine someone who's using a screen reader and will have to go through the navigation every time on each of the web page. Let's say they just want to go to the main content, but because of that, they're trapped to move through the navigation before they move to the main content. So skip link helps with that, because they'll be able to just reach the skip link and immediately go to the main content. It shifts focus to the main content. Now, one thing about skip links, they should come, they should be like the first thing on your website before your nav bar. And also, you might not want to change the look and feel of your website. Like you don't want like some links there before the nav bar. You can position it outside the screen using CSS, and maybe when one focuses on it, maybe using tab or something as they move through the website, it can be able to appear. So that's all about skip links. It meets bypass blocks because they're able to skip repeated content on your website and move immediately to the main page of the main content of your website. Now, one thing, it helps people who are visually impaired. It also helps those who have motor disabilities because, as I say, they're not able to move quite easily as other people do. So, giving them a skip link, they can easily skip to the main content of like your website and able to get the information they need. Now, uh, just a little bit of recap. We've gone through navigation, how to improve our navigation. We've also gone through how to improve like the structure, accessibility using structure. Now, we're still in HTML, and this time we're looking at a different thing. We're looking at tables, HTML tables. We know them, we've seen them a couple of times. So, one thing I'd insist using tables, use them for structuring data and not for layout. We're not in the old days before Flexbox and Grid, where tables were used to like design layouts for websites. So it's easier even for you as a developer to use Flexbox and Grid instead of using tables. So stick to that. Use tables just to structure content into columns and rows, and not use them to display layout of your website. Secondly, use HTML and not CSS. What do I mean by this? If you remember, we had a guideline of info and relationships, which stated that any cues that you give visually to people who can see, you should give the same thing to people using screen readers through semantics. So by semantics, I mean using the right tags. So you can style anything to look like a table, basically. CSS has a lot of power, and you can style it to look like a table, but people using screen readers won't be able to see that. For them, it will just be like a bunch of divs and a bunch of paragraphs and a bunch of information there, and it will make it hard for them to like move through your table, move through it, and get the right information. Because as you know, if it's a table showing prices of things, they'll be unable to know like, okay, this item matches with this price. If you've just styled it with CSS and not using the HTML table. So it's really important to keep the semantics, keep semantics. Use the right tag whenever you need to. Don't just style any other tag to look like a list, to look like a table. Use the right tag. Communicate the same thing that you're giving visually. Communicate it also um, using semantics. Another thing you can do, you can add a table caption. It's really just a caption tag inside the table. It's really the first child of a table, and it just provides like more information of your table. You can use it to give like a table title or a table description, and this helps like prime users who are using screen readers. They're able to know, okay, this is what the table is about. The table is about prices of phones, and yeah, they can know that even as they scroll through the table, they know what it's about. Landmarks. We talked about it in HTML using the right landmarks like header, footer, section. Now for table, they're different. There's the table head, the table body, and the table foot. So using these different sections, it first of all it helps divide your table into different sections, and also it conveys semantics to people who are using screen readers and who cannot be able to see your website. So it conveys to them, you're in the head of the table, you're in the foot, you're in the body, the table body. And yeah, it just makes a better understanding for people who are non-sighted. Still on tables, if you're using like a complex table, if it's, what do I mean by complex table? Nested tables. You nest a table inside a table and you nest another table inside it. That's a complex table. So for such complex tables, provide a summary of the table structure, because people using screen readers can get lost within your complex table. So it's good to like give a structure of how you've put your table. Okay, the first part communicates this, the second communicates that, and the third communicates that. It helps them. It makes life easy for them as they navigate, because visual users will just be able to see and will easily match things. But for people using screen readers and moving through your site, it will be hard for them. Uh, Also, don't use complex tables. Like, why should you? You're already making life hard for people who have accessibility issues. So just use the normal tables, use simple tables. If you're having complex tables, you can break them into smaller tables, but don't use complex tables because they're too hard to navigate for people who are using assistive technologies. Now, all these three all these three tips help meet our common guideline, level double A of informed relationships. So they communicate the same thing. They give good cues to people who are not able to see the site. So it communicates semantics to them. Now we've done a bunch of parts. So we did we started with the structure, and after the structure, we came in and looked at lists. After the lists, we've looked at the tables and how to like improve it. So we're now to a really, really pain point, or like a really important part, which are HTML forms. HTML forms, they're the most common pitfall of accessibility. Like 90% of websites usually don't make their forms accessible. And yeah, it's common to not meet accessibility guidelines with forms. And this presents like a big challenge to people who have uh, disabilities, like accessing the forms. So the outline, how am I going to structure this? We will talk a little bit about accessible forms, how to make our forms accessible. We'll talk slightly about error validation and how to do it accessibly. We'll talk about color and maybe color contrast, and we'll talk about navigating using a keyboard. So as we continue, I just give tips and I give insight on how to improve the accessibility of a website. As I said, we will be having a second part of this talk where we'll be able to do it live with you and to be able to see how we can improve it. So, one major thing is labeling. Uh, in forms, we always use input fields, different input fields, email, if it's name, yeah, different things that we take input from users. But people usually don't label it. People usually use placeholders. Like you put a placeholder inside the input field and people leave it at that. Now, this is a bad practice. Why? First of all, placeholders, default styles of placeholders, they usually dim, they usually like light. So people with low vision might not be able to see the placeholder, and for them, they might just see like a bunch of input fields requiring them to fill something and they don't know what to fill. So that's already a problem. You're already excluding people with low vision. Now, what else? Now, for placeholders, people with vision, people who can see your site, placeholders act funny because for some of them, on focus, when you just focus on that field, they disappear. For others, other browsers, when you click to the input field and like start typing anything, they disappear. So for one, it brings confusion because let's say it was a bunch of instructions in the placeholder text, then someone starts to type, then the instructions disappear. They don't know what to fill. Now, this type of people, mainly people with cognitive disability who can't like retain the information quite well and can't like keep it for long, you're already excluding them. So that's another group you're excluding. And it's really good practice to just use the label tag. And the label tag, it can be either implicit or explicit labels. And by that I mean either the label tag is next to the input tag or the input tag is inside the label tag. So those are two different ways that you can label your forms. But it's really good practice to use the label tag to just provide a visible label, a clear visible label. And also this helps people with low vision, they'll be able to see it clearly even as they continue typing. This helps people with screen readers also. It just gives them the information about the input. Now, have proper contrast. So one problem with contrast, as I said, the placeholders. Contrast usually is how the foreground compares to the background, like what's in front to what's behind, like how does the color match. So in bad contrast, they disappear and it becomes hard to see. For example, the placeholder text, the default style, as I said, sometimes it becomes like quite hard to see it. But for you need to maintain like a good contrast. It needs to be able to be seen clearly, and we look at guidelines pertaining to contrast as we go on. So use proper labels. So using the right labels, first of all, our most common guideline, info and relationships. It meets that because you're really correct. You're already like informing people semantically that you're giving the information that can also be seen visibly. Also, it helps meet level A guideline of headings and labels. So for headings and labels, it's just that you need to provide good headings to your sections and good labels to like any content that you have there. Also, it meets another level A guideline of labels and instructions. So, for labels and instructions, it clearly states that you need to label anything that requires user input. It's a form. People need to fill it, people need to give their input. You need to give good label and you need to give good instructions on how they're supposed to fill it. So, it meets also that guideline. And apart from that, to meet another guideline of visible label, you need to match the accessible label with the visible label. Accessible label, I mean like the content that's on your document structure. Remember, that's the code, and that is what's being accessed by the screen readers, by the other assistive technologies. It needs to match with the visible label. By visible label, I mean what people see. Like the label that people will see on your site is to match the same label that's on the content structure of your site, not the content, the document, the code that you give. Still on forms, as I said, form is usually a major pitfall for many people. People usually don't have accessible forms. So we'll be talking a lot about forms. So still on forms, we have to give proper instructions. By proper instructions, I mean like clear and understandable instructions. And we need to meet a guideline. Level A, remember, level A must be met by every site that you create on the web. The web is universal, it's accessible by any person, accessible from any device, and we need to maintain that. So, level A guideline on sensory characteristics. So, this states that you don't need, like, you should not rely on sensory descriptions only for giving instructions. Don't give instructions that are tied to the shape, that are tied to color, that are tied to position, because sensory instructions might exclude people. People with disabilities, they might not have access to some, like some different types of sense. Like, for example, non-sighted users can see. Vision is a sense. So if once you tell them like an instruction like uh, to submit the form, press the red button. How will they know? They won't be able to see the red button. So, yeah, giving instructions that are tied to sensory characteristics on the top left of your website. They can't be able to see the top left. The round button, the square button, the you get it. Using color, shape, position is a bad way of giving instructions. And if you use it, you're not meeting level A guideline of sensory characteristics. Another thing, we need to group our inputs. So grouping inputs is usually important because when you're having a big form with a lot of data, you need to group them so that it's easily understandable and you just put input fields that require the same type of info, not type. I don't want to use type, but that are related. You can group them. And we usually do this using the field search tag inside the form. And this helps meet our friendly guideline of level double A info and relationships. How does it meet it? As I said, and as I've continued to say, info and relationships, it says that like anything that you present visually to people who can see, you need to present it through semantics to people who cannot. So once you present to people who can see, like you can put like a fancy border or like a fancy thing to show that okay, the form is grouped, but for that, people who are non-sighted won't be able to see the fancy border, won't be able to see the fancy sections that you've styled with CSS. So for that, you need to provide to them a field set. So once they interact with the field set, they'll be able to see, they'll be able to know, okay, oh, this is like a group of input and they're related. So you're giving the same information. So yeah, as I said, you'll meet info and relationships more than 100 times in this talk. So another thing is about tab index. Tab index is usually like a key. a key attribute. And one thing I'd say about type index, it can take a value between 0 and 3000, I think 200 there. But it's not good to give tab indexes more than one. What do I mean by that? You should only use two values for your tab index, either 0 or 1. It makes it quite easy because you're able to give like a good way that your content is structured using the tab key. Like how can they move through your website using the tab key? Later in this talk, we'll be able to use a popular extension called Funkify, and we'll be able to see such things. So yeah, as I said, uh, tab index helps people who have motor disabilities because as we saw in the first part, there's an assistive technology called adaptive switches, and specifically the keyboard switch. So the keyboard switch helps people with motor disabilities easily move through your website, and it usually uses the tab index. So they're able to tab their way through your website, like moving from top to bottom only with a single key, like tab. Yeah. So there's an accessibility guideline. Wow, I have lots of typos. There's an accessibility guideline, level A, talking about keyboard. So it requires that all interactive elements should be operable without using a mouse. That means just only with the keyboard. By interactive, I mean things that require input from the users. So, a form, you should be able to move through your form from top to bottom using just the tab key. So for that, you'll be using tab index just to ensure that they're able to move from top to bottom. And as I said, it helps people with motor disabilities. It helps them like easily move through your form. Still on forms, I said forms is usually a key part of accessibility because it's usually the most common pitfall. And yeah, I know we've looked at a lot of guidelines. I'll be able to share the slides after the talk. And also, we'll be having a live demo sometime soon. So, wow, another typo. Shortcuts. So, shortcuts. We all love shortcuts. VS Code has some good shortcuts, and I enjoy them because it makes life easy. So, people might also provide shortcuts to like moving through their form. And once you have your own defined shortcuts, one thing you need to meet is level A guideline on character key shortcuts. So this guideline requires that whenever you provide shortcuts that you've created, you need to give the users the power to either override the shortcuts and put keys that they want for the shortcuts, or you need to just give them the ability to turn it on and off. In fact, you're supposed to give them all the three. You're supposed to give them the ability to override and remap the shortcuts. You're supposed to give them the ability to turn it on and off also. So I give a good analogy to this. So for those who've played video games, we usually have like the keyboard settings if you're using your PC, or even if you're using your PlayStation 4 or something. There's usually like a bunch of settings that usually come pre-installed with the game. So the game usually have their own settings and keys and shortcuts that work with the game, but still they give you the ability to remap. You're able to go there and change. Okay, this action I want it to be this key. Now, how does this help? People with motor disabilities, as I said, they're not able to move through the keyboard swiftly, and they might just want like all their shortcut keys to just be centered around the same area. So you need to give them the ability to turn it on and off for one, and also to remap it and select the keys they want. Now, visible focus. What does this mean? Level double A guideline. It's a level two, so it's really important, and it's called focus visible. So it requires that you need to provide like a visible way for users to see where they are in your form. This is usually done by maybe like changing the border of the input field, the color of that, or like there should just be like a clear way. And this fits people with low vision and also visual who can see, because it's really frustrating when you don't know where you are in your form or where the focus is in the form. So it's really good to provide like a clear way that people can see, okay, I'm in the name input field, and yeah, I need to type my name here. So they don't even need to start typing for them to know like where they are. Like you need to provide a clear way that they can be able to see like where they are. Now, this is one of the main parts of the form, this last point, and it's usually key: error identification, error validation. It's really tied with the forms, and if you've played around with JavaScript, you've done error validation once in a while. And one thing I'd like to say, level A, use of color. This is a guideline that I need all of you to hear. So level A, use of color. It requires that the only color, should not be used to convey information. People usually fail this a lot because uh, whenever we're doing validation, I for one did the same. We usually use red to signify error. We change maybe the border of the input to be red, and like put a bunch of red everywhere to just show people, okay, there's error. Now, for one, using only color excludes people who are non-sighted because they won't be able to see all the red that you're displaying. Two, people who are colorblind. There's usually, I think, red-green colorblind. So they're not able to tell the difference. You might be providing to them color green, showing that everything's okay, but they might be seeing red and like thinking there's an error. So this is why there's this guideline. So it says that you should not use only color to display information. Like the information maybe you're displaying is there's an error, and you're using only the color red around the input fields to show the error. That is usually very, very, very wrong because you exclude a lot of people from like knowing or getting that information. Now, level A guideline on error identification requires that there should be a way to visually identify your error, and also it should be described by text. Now, this guideline solves the first guideline of use of color. Now, color is still used as a way of conveying information. I'm not saying that you don't use red to display error because it's still used. A lot of popular companies still use it. It's not a bad thing to use red to convey error and green to convey things are good, but it's bad to only use color. Like, get that. Only using color is bad. But when you're using only when you're using color with text, it communicates more because unsighted users will be able to hear the text. Uh, Colorblind people will be able to read the text, and yeah, it's just a win-win. You've included them. So these two guidelines, they complement each other. Error identification insists that you should have, apart from visual identification, which is like the color that you're providing, there should be a text to describe the error. Now, and that solves the problem of use of color. You're not providing only color as a means of information, you're also providing a text. Still on forms, as I said, forms is usually like a key part, and it's really like a major pitfall when it comes to accessibility. So when you're still talking on forms, we usually have the all popular required fields. Oh, you want people to give their name in the form, use an asterisk, or use a different way. So how can we make it accessible, required fields? So when labeling fields, use the required attribute. Another typo. Sorry for that. So use the required attribute in your input fields. Why do we use it? Because using an asterisk, that will communicate to visual users, because they'll be able to see the asterisk and know that these are required fields. But for non-sighted users, they won't be able to know. So using an attribute, the required attribute, it communicates more to non-sighted users. Also, never take never make the assumption that everyone understands that an asterisk means a required field. So if you're providing an asterisk, always put in bracket required. Type it, like give the word required, so that they understand much better. So never only use an asterisk. I know most people know about the asterisk communicating a required field, but not all people know that an asterisk is a required field. So how can we improve that? We give the name required in bracket next to our form label, like just in our label, we can give that next to the asterisk that you've put. And apart from that, we also use the required attribute. It will communicate to non-sighted users. And lastly, what we just used, the type attribute. So using the HTML type attribute for input fields, it helps communicate to non-sighted users to know, okay, this is supposed to take an email for this field because you've given the type. And apart from that, it also helps like provide the right keyboard for mobile users, because if it's number, provide like the number keyboard and such things. Yay, we're done with forms. So those were the different guidelines on forms. I'd say forms are really key, and you really need to understand forms quite well, because creating accessible forms make things easy for people who are using assistive technologies. Now we move to media. What do I mean by media? By media, I mean we have the normal images that we use, we have SVGs, we have video, we have audio. Those are the different forms of media in HTML. Now, remember, we were going through the different types, and as you see from now, I think you kind of notice that HTML is a major part of accessibility, because everything that we've touched on touches on the HTML. We're not even talking about JavaScript or CSS. I know a lot of people usually make jokes and make fun that HTML is not a programming language. It's like a weak language. There are memes around HTML. Uh, yeah, but HTML is key in accessibility. When it comes to the realm of accessibility, HTML is king. Not even JavaScript or CSS can tell it what to do. Like, it's the king of accessibility. So when we get to media, providing an alt text is usually important. Alt text. We all know about alt text, and all of us have done it. We've created websites and left our alt text as an empty string. We've all done it, but it doesn't help. It does not help the people who are using screen readers and who can't see our image. Now, I named this a proper alt text because I could have easily said just write an alt text. But people usually write alt text, but it's not proper. So these are key things that you need to consider to write a proper alt text. Oh, another typo. Really sorry for that. So one thing, don't literally describe things. Do not describe your image like whatever you literally see. If it's a man seated on a couch, don't say an elderly man who's seated on a couch, who's seated on a brown couch and using his black phone. No, don't describe it literally. It doesn't convey meaning. It doesn't like help even the people who are using the assistive technologies. Avoid using words like picture of and image of. So never start the alt text as picture of a man seated on a couch, or picture of, or image of. No, never start it that way, because one thing assistive technologies will always tell the, the people who are using it, their users, that it's an image. So it's redundant when you start your alt text with image of or picture of. You're like repeating the same thing, so it's kind of redundant. Uh, yeah, because assistive technologies, they identify it as an image. Describe the meaning. Describe the meaning and purpose of the image. Why did you put the image there? Like, what's it there for? Like, what is it communicating? That is what you need to put in your alt text. Like, you chose the image for a reason, and there's a meaning it's giving. Although they usually say for background images and images that don't have a meaning, you leave it as an empty string, because when screen readers get to it, they'll skip it. But not all images should be left as an empty string. We usually leave out images as empty. The alt attribute for images is empty strings, to even images that have meaning and purpose. So describe the meaning and purpose of your image. Why did you put it there? Why is it there in the body? There's a reason that you put it there, and there's something you wanted to convey to your users. So that is what you describe in your alt text. Now, you also include any text that's used in the image. So if there's any text written in the image, you can convey it inside the alt text. Remember, there's an there's a guideline stating that you should not use images of text. Yes, images can have some text, but it should not like be the main thing. If you want a fancy font and then maybe it's on an image, you can use Google Fonts or something. Use other web fonts to convey, to just write the same thing and style your font, but don't use images of text. Yeah. That's all about images. Alt text is usually the main thing surrounding images. Now we move to SVGs. Now, one thing you'll notice, I think maybe next time we might do a demo on this. Screen readers usually don't identify SVGs. SVGs are just basically invisible. They have an invisible clock, and screen readers usually don't identify them. So for SVGs to be discoverable, you can add a role attribute to the SVG and make it like a role of image, so that when screen readers get to it, they'll be able to identify the SVG and communicate the same to non-sighted users. Now, finally, on media, I wanted to talk about this one point, and it's captioning. Captioning, I am talking more about audio and video. So, audio and video are usually like common things that we usually put. And a caption is just like a description of what's happening. For audio, we can always use transcripts. Transcripts are just like written format of the audio, and it's good for people who have hearing impairment, who can't listen to the audio. So once you give them like a transcript, they're able to follow up and get the same information that's being passed through by the audio. For video, captions, whether it's closed or open, captioning is good. Closed captioning are the ones that are embedded inside the video. Open captioning are usually outside the video. And one thing I'd say about captioning, you can always provide non, non, how do I say it? You can always provide cues that are not verbal, like that convey meaning. Take for example, uh, if you've ever watched these movies that have good captions, like if someone bangs a door and that bang has like meaning, maybe it's conveying the person is angry. It's usually written there, maybe in brackets, bangs the door. So it conveys, like if it's a non-verbal cue, let me say it that way. If it's a non-verbal cue that has meaning in the video, you need to also convey it in the caption. so that people who can't listen to the video can be able to get that information. Now, one thing about captions, captions are not only for people who have hearing impairment. As I said, disabilities and impairments can be situational. Let's say you're working in a really noisy place. That's a situational disability. You can't hear clearly, and therefore captions will also help you. It's not that you can never hear, but the environment around you has prevented you. Another example of situational disability is when it comes to contrast. As I said, you need to provide good contrast, and sometimes contrast changes. Maybe someone's reading something and the sun shines on the phone. It kind of changes the contrast. So media always provide captions or transcripts for audios and captions for videos. Now, I wanted to provide like these statistics. So they're gotten from the internet on how different accessibility properties are, how there's compliance in different accessibility properties. So things to do with low contrast, they have like high compliance. Things to do with alt text, they so it's from these ones are the most complied ones, like the most followed. Uh, Language attribute, as I said, most people usually put it because it's just something they do. Uh, this one is empty buttons. People usually label their buttons. Then these ones are the ones that are most usually not followed most of the time. So missing form labels, as I said, form is usually a major pitfall. Empty links, sometimes people provide empty links. As I said, there's usually a guideline to that a link text should fully describe what the link's about. And there's missing alt text. As I said, we all loved that empty string. And there's also on contrast. People don't choose the right colors on the fore and background, and it causes contrast issues. So, the main concept that I'm trying to pass across here is accessibility is not a feature. So, I know we've talked a lot about things. We've talked about how HTML helps out. We've talked about how to improve the document and content structure. We looked at lists, we looked at tables, we looked at forms, we've even looked at media. A lot we've talked about, but what's the main concept that I'm trying to pass across? Accessibility is not a feature, like it's not an additional feature that we provide that, okay, let's just make this a feature that people can use it. No, accessibility is a requirement. Like you need to make your sites accessible. Why? It's just about being humane and empathetic. People have different kinds of disabilities, and it's not on their own volition. Some of them are born that way. Some of them had like uh, a bad accident or something along the way, and things changed. So it's just about being humane and empathetic, understanding their situation, and apart from that, like getting to know how what they're going through and just understanding it in a good way and helping them out. So empathy is more about understanding and doing something to help. So my last point would be, if we're going to build for the web, let's do it right. Let's do it right. Let's make our content accessible. Let's put accessibility as a requirement, and let's build right things on the web. The web is a universal platform. It's accessible across multiple platforms. So the phone, the tablets, our, our laptops and PCs. It's basically universal and accessible. So we need to maintain the same thing. We need to make sure that everything that we use is accessible to everyone. And yeah, uh, Param, I think I'm done. I hope you can still hear me.
Clifford. Uh, It was a wonderful talk so far. The presentation was really great. So when you mentioned the placeholders, it really brought me to think about it, because I never really considered it that well, how bad it can be for people seeking accessibility. It just looked good to us, so we didn't really give it much thought, and that was quite something interesting.
Yeah, so I think one last thing I wanted to show is we usually don't know how people go through. We usually don't know the challenges that people go through when they're trying to access our websites. And there's usually a great extension to do that, and it's really called Funkify. So Funkify, it simulates the different kinds of impairments and the different kinds of disabilities that people face while using our sites, and you're able to like go into their shoes and see how things from their own end. So I wanted to do a simple demo using Funkify. Now it's just a simple extension. I think there's one for Chrome, there's one for Mozilla. I think there's also one for Edge. I'm not so sure, but it's called Funkify, and basically they're different characters with different names. Now these different characters they depict different kinds of disabilities. So we have blurry Bianca, uh, low vision. We have Color Carl, who's colorblind. We have Dyslexia Danny, who has dyslexia. We have Trembling Trevor, motor disability. We have Tunnel Toby, who can't see things clearly. We have Peripheral Perry, Elderly Ellen, and a bunch of other characters. So I think we'll simulate a number of them, which you can try on the Campus Experts website. So this is Blurry
Clifford,
Bianca. Mhm.
Clifford, can you share your entire screen rather than the window? I think the extension is not
Okay,
visible yet.
okay. Let me try and fix that. Okay,
Yes,
is
yes,
it visible now? Yeah,
yes, yes.
so yeah, this is the Campus Expert website, and this is Funkify. I think I'll just like go over it again. So it's just a good extension to understand how people face different kinds of disabilities. And as I say, there are different characters. We have Blurry Bianca, Kala Kal, Dyslexia Danny, and a bunch of other characters displaying different kinds of disabilities. So I was trying to simulate Blurry Bianca. So you just click on start and it modifies the website. There are different levels of how blurred they see things. And yeah, if we put it maybe moderate, like this is how someone with blurry vision will see your website. Like they can't even clearly read the text. They can't. And maybe if we try to increase the size, maybe it makes it much clearer. And as you can see, we talked on a guideline on resizing text. So this site is clearly accessible because I can resize the text until it's really big, and it gives a clearer way to like see the site itself. So people who have blurry vision might want to increase the text size of your website to see things. So, and as I said, it's good if you use relative CSS units for that. If we try maybe someone different, this flag is red, right? And people usually like using red for error validation, as I said in forms. And error validation, as I said, there was that guideline. You shouldn't use only color to display the instruction. You should use like some text. So if we try and simulate color cal to see, now color cal will see it as a green flag. Like he clearly won't see the red, and a bunch of other colors will change also for him. For him, the site is very different from what you normally know, which is why it's really important to see these things real time and like understand them. For me, it hits hard because I have low vision. Sometimes I can't see things clearly, and yeah, for me, I understand it because I'm part of them. But for you, you might not understand the challenges that people face. And Funkify is a good way. You can just create your site, try different kinds of characters. Let's say we try Trembling Trevor. Yeah. And we see Trembling Trevor will even have a hard time clicking this because the cursor will always be trembling and he can't easily click things. So he might want to use tab. You see, tab makes it easy for him because it's tab index and he's able to move through the site with only the tab key. See, so yeah, these are the kinds of things that I was talking about and why it's important to incorporate accessibility. Maybe you can try one last one before we hand the questions. Okay, let me see. Sunshine, Sue. So like everything becomes really bright to her because, as I said, it's a situational thing. It's not permanent. Maybe she's reading your website and the sun is blazing at her phone and it changes the contrast of like the whole website and some things might really change. As you can see, we've even lost the map and we don't even know where the campus experts are again. So yeah, this is just like an example. As you can see, even the links that are here can't easily be seen because this is a situational thing. Maybe she's reading the sun and it's not permanent. As I said, disabilities can be situational, permanent, or just temporary. Yeah, so you can always take time, install this extension, try out different things. You can even try out Tunnel Toby and see how he sees your site. Yeah, but I think we will take on any questions that are there. I think I'm done now.
Wow, that was a really amazing extension, Clifford. I just saw how you demonstrated different kinds of disabilities. It was really nice. I think it will help people develop applications that are accessible to all kinds of people with all kinds of disabilities. Before moving on to the Q&A, I would like to mention that you will find lots of music on my channel because I make songs as a part of my musical career, and I have realized that adding open captions to the songs, open or closed captions, really makes it more accessible, and actually it also allows more people to be attracted towards the content, especially people who can't um, understand it while hearing. And they can, and I also add the lyrics in the transcript, which helps a lot people who want to go back to something that was mentioned, that was said in the song, and they couldn't hear it. And while designing the poster for this workshop, I was really careful about making the poster accessible, because it wouldn't be nice if the poster isn't accessible for an accessibility workshop. So I hope I did well in there. let's uh,
Yeah, yeah.
let's move on to the Q&A. So there's a really popular programming language nowadays known as TypeScript, and it is gradually overcoming JavaScript to become the most popular front end development language. And the thing with TypeScript is, if you have a 5-year-old project that uses a lot of JavaScript, it is going to be a really big challenge for you to migrate the entire project to TypeScript. And the thing about TypeScript is it requires a little more attention while writing the code, because you have to mention the types, you have to make sure that all variables are statically typed. But that extra attention during development helps you ensure less errors during runtime or during deployment. So in many ways, the presence of TypeScript these days is similar to the way we implement accessibility features. What I mean to say is, if you start off with TypeScript, you're better in the long run than migrating an existing project that uses no TypeScript to using TypeScript. The same goes for accessibility. When we develop any project, if we don't start with making it fully accessible, and it has been a very long time, it will be hard for us to migrate the project. So if we are developing a new project, a new web application project, when do you think is the correct time to implement accessibility features in the application?
Okay, so one thing with accessibility features, they're basic. I think I've shown you how they're really basic. It doesn't require like some big React dependency or like a really big thing to do it. They're basically just the HTML part. And when implementing accessibility, I'd say the same way we structured our content, we're talking about tables. There are things related to tables, accessibility issues there, the accessibility issues related to forms. So I'd advise any person like making a website, as you said, when you start off with accessibility, it becomes quite easy going forward, and it becomes like easy than building an inaccessible website, then trying to convert it to be accessible. It becomes quite hectic then. So when you start it off, just whatever you're trying to create, as I said, I think I started it off well. It starts with the doc type, just from this first line that you're writing in your HTML. It goes to the language attribute that you put in the HTML. When you're building a form, you should look at the accessibility issues that are related with forms, then implement it while implementing the form. So I'd say the best time to implement accessibility is while you're creating. Just as you're going on through the different things that you're adding to your site, check accessibility issues related to that and ensure that you implement it.
Hmm. That makes sense. And we have the Valentine's Day approaching, so I would like to say a little something that uh, tells us about the similarity. So the thing is, when you have a romantic partner, it is often said that we do little things to give them happiness rather than doing big things at once. So little gestures of connection makes builds a good relationship. Similarly, little attempts to add features, accessibility features, makes the application more accessible. So I think we can use that analogy here. We use lots of applications these days. I'm pretty sure many of us rely on Google for most of our search engine needs. We use Facebook, Twitter, and other web-based applications. So, Clifford, how accessible do you find the applications that you use in your daily life?
Okay, so for the applications that I use in my daily life, so one thing, as I said, I'm usually low vision sometimes, and yeah, it becomes quite hard, like seeing things. So I have to increase like font size. I think even if you've seen in my presentation, like some of the things are like really big fonts, just to make it easy for me to be able to see it. So one thing I find it very easy, like use most common sites that we use. As I showed you, even with the campus expert site, like it's easy to scale, to increase the size. I just increase size in my browser, and it scales the website along, and it makes it quite easy to read through. So I can say, uh, for me, it's actually accessible. It's not that bad, but I can say for others, it's usually like a nightmare, depending on like the kind of impairment you have. Like there are others that people usually focus on when they're doing accessibility, like mainly permanent ones and mainly related to sight. People usually focus much on sight, but people forget there are other things like color blindness. There are other things like cognitive disability, making things easy to understand, and yeah, it becomes just a nightmare for these people. So I'd say for me it's quite easy, but for others it becomes like a big problem.
Hmm. I see. That makes sense. So I think even in the industry, there are applications that are currently in the phase of implementing accessibility. Together, we are moving forward to a more accessible future for web applications. In Bootstrap, we have we noticed that most of the documentation already specifies code that is accessible. They have already added the necessary attributes for us to copy and paste while developing in Bootstrap. So we have something known as form groups in Bootstrap, and you mentioned that we should use field sets to combine similar fields. So are field sets the same as form groups?
Okay, so one thing I'd say about this different libraries and frameworks that are there, they make life easy. That's one thing. They look at different challenges that the current existing language has, and they improve it and make it easy to do things. So for Bootstrap, like one thing I was talking about was visually hidden text, right? And I was saying like you might want to provide information. For example, the read more button that people usually love, and in sites using articles is usually there a lot. Uh, for you, you might see read more, but they might have provided more context to it, but it's just visually hidden because for you, you'll understand, you'll click, you've read through the article and you know what it is. And you know when you click, you'll be reading more on what. But for people having screen readers and such, it might be quite hard. So that information, the extra information is for them and not for you. So one thing I can say, Bootstrap has a way to implement that that's easy. Like it basically has an attribute to do that, and it does it quite well. So I'd
Mhm.
say under the hood, they just do the same thing. It's just that it's making it easy for you. Instead of you putting a bunch of field sets, it's just like an attribute, just add and it's done. So yeah, I'd say it's just under the hood, it's just the same thing, but they're making life easy for you.
Mhm. I see. Yes, I totally agree with you. So these frameworks make it easier for us as developers to continue development in the same manner as we have been practicing while maintaining accessibility of the applications by following the standards.
Yeah,
So,
for one thing I can say is like for example, like React Native, it builds apps on the phone, but still the same can be done with vanilla JavaScript, but it will be like very hard and very hectic. So yeah, these frameworks usually just try to make things easy, and but under the hood, they do all the hard work for us. But for us, we just like do the easy part. Then under the hood, they do everything.
mhm. Well, it's good that we have these standards in place that allow us to develop fully accessible applications, because if someone else didn't do the hard part for us earlier to classify literally everything that makes an application accessible, it wouldn't be easy for us to figure everything out while developing. So, you are from Kenya, I am from India, we are both from the eastern side of the world. There are many things we can relate to, and we have lots of cultural differences from the west, um, especially when it comes to linguistics. So we talked about situational disability, situational accessibility. It doesn't necessarily have to be the case that you are disabled, but the situation doesn't allow you to have the application as accessible as possible. There are languages like many languages where we write from top to bottom in this fashion. So that is one way of describing. So whenever we hear about a language, we generally tend to assume that it is going to be written from left to right, which is not usually the case with every language. In India, we have a language known as Urdu, where we write from right to left. um, so there are some differences that need to be taken into account. We already have the standards in place, and most of them are developed by organizations in the west. So do you think that the current accessibility standards are westernized?
Okay, to that question, I'd say yes. I feel like they're westernized because, like the example that you've given, like standards relating to like an Indian language, but the people who wrote the standards, they're not like locals. They're not like people who understand the language quite well. And I'd not blame the Westerners for doing this. In fact, they're giving good structure and like more organization and even accessibility. For example, as I said, we have like Section 508. It's also like a good guideline, but most of what is covered in Section 508 is basically it meets federal institutions in the US much better, and it won't like fit in for you as a person. Although I said uh, WCAG 2.1 has everything in Section 508, it's not like everything is the same, but it communicates the same thing. So yeah, most guidelines are westernized, and situational uh, things happen depending on the culture, depending on your area of locality. That's why I'd say the guidelines are not set in stone. Like they're not fixed depending on like the situation. Because for one thing, the guidelines focus more on permanent disabilities and maybe temporary ones. They don't focus much on situational. But it's you as a person to see, okay, such a situation can happen and how can you improve on it. A guideline can't be written for all the situations because like there are million situations that can happen that can lead to uh, inaccessible websites and inaccessible web tools. So guidelines can't be written for every situation that can happen. So it's
Mhm.
more about like you as a person stepping up. So if you are in India and you feel like this is a problem on accessibility and the Western policies and solutions that are there don't address it, you can address it in your site. Like you can fix it yourself because you like understand it and you can improve on it. So you as a person, it's you to stand up and to improve. So like the current guidelines are just there to help you, to give you direction on where to start. But other things you can always include on yourself.
Mhm. I agree. And as developers who build for our country, and ones who try to make applications accessible to the people of our local regions, it's on us to develop them in a manner that makes them accessible both linguistically and in all other visual and auditory measures needed to do that. So, moving on, we have lots of fixed in browser stylings for existing components. Like for p tags, let's talk about p tags. So, p tags are used to represent paragraphs, and if we use p tags to represent a patch of text, we usually make it semantically clear that it is a paragraph. Similarly, if we use a button tag, we are making it clear to the browser or a screen reader that it is a button. We can also use, so oftentimes there are styles that are fixed by the browser in regards to the tag that we are using. If we don't add any css at all, there will be a certain style provided to the button or the paragraph that we create. And even if we write some css, we are going to have to override a couple of the existing style specifications in order to achieve the style that we want for our components. Many people see it as an escape to simply use a div or a span and add the role attribute specifying the role of that particular tag, so that they have to write less code to escape to get rid of the to override the existing style specification by the browser, while still keeping the application accessible. So, according to you, is it better to use semantic tags, or should we rely on the role attribute and move on to using divs and spans?
Okay, so it's that's a really good question. I'd say this: divs and spans were really well used before like HTML5 and before like this semantic tags came. They were the most popular. And yeah, we always use the role tag. But let's take it from the perspective of a person using a screen reader. If they're skimming through your website, if they're skimming through, let's say they just want to move through to get like the content and the structure of your website, they would go deep into the attributes. Like they might just skim through it. And what will they hear? Like it's just a bunch of divs organized, right? But if you use like semantic things, semantic tags, once the screen reader tells them about the tag, oh, this is a header, or you moved, you're in the main, or you're in their side section, you're in article, you're in the footer, so they can easily get. So yes, role will still do the same thing because they'll be able to know the role of that tag, but it's just much better and easier for them to get like the information faster if you use like a semantic tag, but still the role is still do the same. But why use roles? Why use create a div with a role of a paragraph while there's an existing tag of paragraph? Like it just doesn't make sense, right? So it's just better to use like the right semantic tag for it, because as I said, one thing, there's the guideline on info and relationships, and it says like anything you provide through visual cues should be provided semantically, like it should be in a semantic way. So using the semantic tags, it's really great because one thing, screen readers are developed, developers create it, and they create it in the best way, knowing the current HTML guidelines. So they know, okay, semantic tags are there. So they make it with the best experience when they interact with semantic tags. So the old way of using the divs with the roles, it's kind of duplicated. Just like the same way I was talking about tables, like before before the grid and the flexbox came in to save us, people are using tables for layouts. Like if you want to lay out your website, you use a big table containing everything in it. So that's just the same way. Like right now, which developer will start using like a table to lay out their own website? Like it's already hectic, it's hard on your end, and also it makes life even much harder on the side of accessibility, because as I said, it will be a complex table, and complex tables are usually hard to navigate with screen readers.
Hmm. I
Yeah.
agree. That makes sense.
And
And
one thing you were saying about uh, you were talking about, I think the first part of your question, you were talking about like uh, using the different duplicated methods. And one thing I'd say about that is let's just conform, because everything conforms as we move on. Like WCAG, I said it's version 2.1 currently. There were other ways that were there before, but they usually sit down and see, okay, this is still a problem and we've not addressed this. We can add it in and like make it much better. They add different guidelines. Same thing with ECMAScript. They come with new features and different ways. So like using deprecated methods, it's usually not a good thing for a developer. Like a developer, you need to be good. You need to be adapting, learning, especially if you're doing web development. Web development changes rapidly with time, so you need to be changing along with it.
hmm, I agree. I agree. That makes a lot of sense. It might be so we can take on some extra struggle during development to make our content as accessible as possible. And regarding the difficulties in the browser defined stylings, I think there are developers who already accessed, who already fixed that for us, because we have libraries like Bootstrap already resetting the default values for us when we are using them. And we also have libraries like normalize.css on npm that allow us to normalize everything for ourselves while defining the styles. So that is really interesting. So we talked about screen readers. They are tools that are used by people who are either blind or have visual difficulties. What is the first thing that a screen reader looks for in a web application to make sure that it's accessible and to tell the user about the website?
So I think we were talking about structure, and as I said, uh, there are two types of structure. Like there's the content structure, which is like the information that you're passing across on your website. Like why did you create your website? To pass some information. So like there's that content that's there in the website, and there's the document structure, the code that you wrote. So for screen readers, they do not access the content. Okay. they access it, but not directly. They access it through the structure of your document. So whenever a screen reader is going through, it will see like your code. As I said, things like doc type, they are really valid here because they give like some good essence. The code is parsed well, and the screen reader understands it quite well. So screen readers, the first thing they go to is your code, and they understand your code, and now they break it down and say it out to people who are visually impaired. So, as I said, the same thing, I'll repeat. One major guideline is usually info and relationships. Like it guides a lot of things. And as you saw, we were repeating it over and over again. And just the same, just to give an example, you're styling something to look like a table. Maybe it's just a bunch of divs and paragraphs, but you've put some good CSS and it's in a table format. But when a screen reader goes through it, it just sees a bunch of divs and paragraphs. Like it does not see the table. So to make it much clearer, it accesses your HTML, the document structure, not the CSS, not the JavaScript, but mainly the HTML. So using semantic tags and such things, it makes life easy because the screen readers can see the semantic tags and can make the right changes and can like pass the information correctly to the user who's using the screen reader. So first thing screen readers go for the HTML. As I was saying, HTML is usually a despised language because people feel like it's easy and people say it's not a full-fledged language. But when it comes to accessibility, HTML is king. Like everything to do with accessibility, HTML rules that. Not the CSS, not the JavaScript. It's the HTML that people hate, that people usually despise.
Well, as much as people like to complain and make fun of HTML, it is something that the web developers can't survive without. Even if you are not writing HTML, you are using HTML in the end. And the reason why people can see your application on the web is because it is the first language that it uses is HTML. So I think after this workshop, students and learners will have a little more respect for HTML, considering how it makes our applications more accessible to users. And something about the web platform is it allows us to deliver a single application to many different platforms. One web browser can easily make the same website accessible in the same manner to people using different devices or operating systems. Although we need to care about the device and operating system more while developing a non web application like maybe a mobile application or a desktop application, do accessibility features vary throughout different devices and operating systems?
Yes. So I think one topic that has been really hitting the accessibility space is responsiveness. So responsiveness addresses the part of devices, and I think I talked about it in the first part, talking about viewport. But responsiveness brings challenges with it to accessibility, because let's just use a simple example. You have your website and you want to make it responsive to a smaller screen. Now, on your website, you'll have like a lot of content, and yeah, it will just be a bunch of content on your website. But on the smaller screen, you have smaller space to work with. So you just reduce, you'll remove like other unnecessary content and hide them and like keep the main content. Now, how you hide your content is very, very important. It's very key because people use different ways to hide their content. So they should be hidden accessibly. By that I mean something like making it uh, visually hidden. How you write your CSS code, how you hide it, because you can hide it by just pushing it off screen. You can like just maybe like using absolute positioning, you position it off screen. That's one way you can hide the content. And yes, visual people won't see it. But when it comes to screen readers will notice the content that's off screen. When it comes to people with motor disabilities, they're tabbing through your website. Those the content that's off screen will still be in the tab order, and it's usually called a keyboard trap when someone's using your website and they're tabbing through your website, and suddenly the tab index disappears and they don't know where it is. So like they're trapped because it's tabbing through content that's off screen, and they're not able to
Hmm.
see where it is, or like where they are or where it's going through. So yeah, responsiveness brings like a lot of challenges regarding accessibility. So different devices, for example, mobile devices, they have tapping. Tapping now is a method. There's no clicking there, like using a mouse. So input changes. From there, it's taking things like tapping. Like for example, there's a guideline around gestures. Phones like using gestures. Like nowadays, you can type a W, it opens WhatsApp and such things. So there's a guideline around it saying that for every gesture, there should be an alternative way of doing it. Because people with motor disabilities, for example, I was showing like trembling, I think it was trembling Carl, like the way they're trembling, they would be able to draw up the gestures quite easily. And if you don't provide an alternative way for them to do the same action, like you've already excluded them, they can't do it. And they might be frustrated and just like leave using your application and such. So yeah, I can say it's true. Different devices and responsiveness bring different challenges to accessibility.
Hmm.
Maybe we
I
can have
agree.
that as a talk for another day.
Definitely. We can have a discussion on that. It is a very big topic, and responsiveness is something new developers struggle with a lot. They are like, oh my god, so we have done everything, still our application is not being responsive. We have to convert the navigation bar into a button that expands, things like that. But in the end, it makes the application more accessible, and it also benefits the developer because their application can be used by more people. We do something similar while doing search engine optimization. We add meta tags and we structure the document properly. We add the robots.txt, and then we also have something known as the sitemap, which so the sitemaps provide a clear way of organizing the content and giving search engines a way to navigate throughout the website. In big applications, this is considered the most reliable way to know where how different parts of the website are linked. So since it is really helpful in search engine optimization, does providing a sitemap make navigation in the website more accessible too?
Definitely. I think I touched on it as I was going through my presentation. So there's usually the guideline on multiple ways, a level AA guideline on WCAG on multiple ways. And as I was saying, making navigation accessible. Like you need to provide different ways that people can access content on your website. As I said, one example was using a search bar. They can be able to search, okay, search this, and it brings to them search results, and they can easily move to that point without having to go through your whole website. And but for static sites, as I said, maybe you're having a simple site that search bar would be an overkill. Like you have done too much by implementing a search bar. So you'd want something simple to go with. A sitemap is good. Now, sitemap will bring SEO features to your website. It will improve search engine optimization on your website, but at the same time, kill two birds with one stone. You improve your SEO, and you make your navigation more accessible. People with screen readers can access your sitemap and see the whole structure of your website and move to where they want to. As I said, websites are usually mainly used for passing information, and yeah, once they go, they can extract the information they need with ease using a sitemap. So sitemap, as I said, it kills two birds with one stone. It improves your SEO, and at the same time, it makes it more accessible, and specifically the navigation. And the guideline tied around that is level AA guideline on multiple ways. And imagine it's a AA guideline. So like you're making a site more accessible, because as I said, there are three levels. There's the level A, which is a requirement for all sites. Level AA is like a it has everything in level A and has more features. and level triple A is now the highest level. Okay, I think my
Oh, sorry. I think my my mic was muted. Sorry about that.
oh yeah,
Um,
I couldn't hear anything.
so with AA, we are already making the application more accessible simply by providing a sitemap. And even for small applications, it would be very easy for the developers to manually create sitemaps. Though we have tools out there that allow us to dynamically generate sitemaps, especially with frameworks like React and Angular. So developers might consider checking that out. Moving on, we have some trivia questions for you, which might require a bit of thinking, and they might be pertaining to your particular expertise in the tech world. The first question is, since you are a React Native developer, you mostly develop mobile applications and you have significant expertise in that as well as accessibility. So most of the hybrid mobile application development frameworks use a structure very similar to HTML and web applications by using components that are nested within each other with properties and attributes. So does a hybrid mobile application development use a similar approach to accessibility as web applications?
So yeah, for hybrid uh, mobile app development, like maybe React Native, because the platforms, yes, it does use similar features. Because one thing I can say, React Native is just like almost 90% similar to React, and the things that just change maybe are the component names and like how things operate, but basically almost everything that it uses is just from the React, because it belongs to the same ecosystem. So for mobile, for different web frameworks like React, Angular, Vue, they usually have like something similar to the HTML with the roles and attributes, as you are saying, and they usually just work the same way. Like these attributes provide more context to what's being created, and this context that's provided increases the accessibility, and it makes people who are using things like screen readers, because nowadays screen readers are not just for the PC and for websites, but even phones have screen readers that help people move through the apps, and even the phone itself, the UI. So yeah, it provides more context and explains more to people. And yeah, it improves accessibility. So for hybrid and the normal web applications, it's just the same.
I see. I use an Android phone as my primary mobile device, and I already see lots of accessibility features available in the phone. So I think web developers, if they're moving on to developing mobile applications or responsive websites as well, they can try out the accessibility features present in their own mobile phones to understand how they work and to make their applications more accessible and do the necessary testing. So, moving on to the next question, I would like to mention that in India, there's a term Vikalang that is used to refer to disabled people. It is a combination of Vikal and Ang, which means body part that's not functioning properly. The Prime Minister of India and the government and the people decided to change that, and now we use a new term that's Divyang, which is a combination of Divya and Ang, which refers to a divine body part, a person with a divine body part. This is a way to pay respects to the people who are born with or who have situational or long-term disabilities, and we are doing everything we can to make disabled people make it easier for disabled people to get employed and to make the world a better place for divyangs. So recently, I got to know that in the world of tech and web development, we are slowly having more and more disabled people involved in developing web applications. So in addition to making the content for the develop for this disabled people are also developing content. So as a not disabled person, if I have to develop a web application, I can test out pretty much everything and make sure that my application is accessible in every possible way. But for a moment, let's assume that I myself have a disability. Uh, would it become harder for me uh, to address disabilities in my application if I myself have some disabilities?
As a matter of fact, I say it can become easier because you're in that situation, you understand everything you're going through. You've been through sites that have been quite a hell going through. You've faced the problems, you've seen, like, you know everything. You know, for us, we tend to show empathy. We try to think and we try to see things in their way. But for someone who's facing the issue themselves, they know where it hurts, they know the pain points, they know what they need to do. Because, for one, if you maybe try out a site, if you're having motor disabilities and you're having a problem with the tab index, they know, okay, once they learn something called a tab index, they know, okay, this is something that can help me uh, fix an issue that I ever faced. So for them, it's quite easier for them to relate. For us, it's more like we're trying to imagine ourselves in that situation, and imagining it is not like as effective as going through it, because, as I said, us trying to imagine it, there are lots of situations that can happen, and for them, they're going through the situations in their life. Like, they have to use websites belonging to others, because obviously you can't create your own websites for everything. Like, you have to use tools created by other people, and maybe they have gone through situations that were faced, maybe websites that became inaccessible to them, and such situations, they usually remember them. So for someone who's learning like web development and maybe has motor disability, they understand where the pain hurts, they understand where the problem is, and they can better create even accessible websites for people with motor disabilities than even me or you, who we try to imagine ourselves in that position.
Hmm. Wow. So, what I understand is it is quite the opposite in the case of web development. If we have a web developer with disabilities in our team, then the term disabled doesn't stay relevant anymore. It actually enables our application to be more accessible. So, we should definitely encourage more disabled people to get into the world of development and develop applications that help people in their respective communities.
Yeah, I think that's why when you see maybe many job applications, there's usually like a section where you state if you're a person with a disability, because they understand that they go through a lot. And, like, as I said, one thing with user experience design, for example, we try to bring people with different perspectives, or even in development, like having people with different perspectives and different experiences and different cultures. It diversifies the team and makes you create even better products, because instead of like imagining of things, there's someone who's gone through the same thing and understands it quite better and can come up with better solutions of solving it.
Hmm, I agree. That makes a lot of sense. We have more people coming, more blind people coming in the world of front end web development. So we are slowly addressing the issue of screen reading errors in web applications. And gradually, we can move on to having people with more disabilities in the development world, eventually moving to a better ecosystem for people with disabilities. Now, we talked about lots of things revolving around HTML and the front end of web applications. So far, the idea of making an application accessibility sounds so much like a front end thing. How, according to you, can backend developers assist in developing accessible web applications?
Okay, so for backend developers, okay, backend developers usually don't deal much. They deal much with how the data is saved and everything. But what I can say, they still interact with the HTML. Like, they still HTML is like everything to do is keen in accessibility, as I said, and they still interact with it, and they still need to know some HTML for them to like interact well, for them to integrate their backend well with the front end. And usually they deal with interactive elements, like maybe, for example, the form and such that take the input and the input is saved. For example, like maybe even a login page, like this input being taken and being saved. So I think for them, I'd say they'd handle more of situational disabilities, like maybe let's say what happens when someone's trying to upload something to, when some data is being uploaded to the database, and let's say there's like low internet connection or like slow internet speeds and such things. It's still situational. It's not a disability like breaking your arm or something, but it's situational. It's something that brings problem, and it's a barrier. Like as I said, accessibility is just removing the barriers that prevent people from interacting quite well with the website. So I'd say it's more of how they'll interact more of the functionality part. I'd say backend would deal more with accessibility around functionality, like how functional things are, that maybe things that integrate with the backend, how functional are they to people. So I'd say they would deal with the front end part, right? But still, functionality is still part of accessibility. For example, when you have low internet speeds and you have to like wait for like 10, 15 minutes or something uploads halfway, and then because of low internet speeds, it disappears. Then when you try to reload, you have to start again. You see, like such things, they're situational, and it's a barrier preventing you from like having that good experience with that website. It's still an accessibility issue. So yeah, don't think. I'd say people should not think alone accessibility alone around people with disabilities and impairments only, but situational things are also there, because even in the photo I showed, there were things like a mother carrying a child. That's a situational disability because they can't use both arms quite well. Someone in a noisy space, that's a situational disability, you can't hear quite well. So yeah, as I said, situations are so many that can happen, and but there's still accessibility issues.
Hmm, I see. So listening to this is really empowering for backend developers because we can also use the power of creating the functionality in the backend to make sure that our application is more accessible to disabled circumstances, especially situational disabilities, like Clifford mentioned. Moving forward, the last question we have for you is since you have talked so much about accessibility, are there any applications whom you idealize that you idealize as having perfect or close to perfect accessibility standards?
Okay, so one thing I'd say, I like uh, Microsoft's way of handling accessibility issues. Like they usually like have good ways of handling accessibility. I'd say there are two companies that really I really love the way they handle accessibility issues. That's Microsoft and Apple. Like they they really dive deep into the accessibility problems, and they really understand it quite well. So, okay, in the limited time that I've interacted with them, I know that there are lots of other companies that still do the same things like Google, GitHub, and the rest. But mainly, I'd say Microsoft, because I've interacted a lot with Microsoft, the Windows that I use in my computer, and the different apps that I use from them, and seeing the new features that they bring on, like different features that improve the experience. uh, Even to me as a person, I might not be disabled in that area, but even to me as a person, it improves like certain areas. And yeah, I'd say Microsoft is like a big company that I idealize when it comes to accessibility, and even the accessibility workshops that they have and conferences. Like they usually have like big conferences centered only around accessibility and like how can improve, bring people from different backgrounds to share on accessibility. Like you said, maybe India might having a situational thing that needs to be addressed. So bringing someone from there can share their views and they can get that information and also take it into consideration of their building.
Hmm, I see. And that's really amazing, and it also strikes a similarity in my mind that Apple and Microsoft, the companies that you mentioned, to have somewhat ideal standards of accessibility, both are known to be the companies that develop and provide the biggest commercial operating systems in the market right now. So I think the ability to understand accessibility from such a lower level comes from developing down to earth applications like the operating systems, which really define the whole infrastructure of how people use technical devices these days. And I think this is something we can learn a lot from, because system designers and developers have a really good grasp of accessibility related features, because they themselves work on them while developing the applications. We have, so in the chat it is mentioned that somebody wants the presentation. So at the end of the live stream, I'll add the presentation in the video description. You can check that out later on. um, so it was really nice having the question and answer session. You gave really wonderful answers, Clifford. Thank you very much for doing the workshop. We learned a lot. I think the students will be very motivated to developing applications with accessibility features from the very start, and we might end up promoting accessibility related infrastructure in the development world and the ecosystem at our campus. Um, as Indians and as people who have worked and lived with lots of people who are disabled, we at our own campus have lots of people with certain disabilities. We can now finally understand what we can do on our part to develop applications that have accessibility features embedded into them. And there also needs to be a lot of awareness regarding the accessibility tools that are out there in the market, because in India, most of the disabled people are not a large number, a large fraction of the disabled people are not aware of the tools they can use to uh, make use of the accessibility features that are out there in web applications. So I think that is what we are targeting from now onwards. We'll have you again at our community sometime later, Clifford. I'm also thinking of inviting you over for React Native, because it is something quite fascinating for React developers to be able to create mobile applications. And overall, the workshop was really nice. We enjoyed a lot. Thank you very much, Clifford. I think we'll end the live stream now.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And yeah, as I said, it's best we develop it right. If let's just start from the right note. Let's have accessibility from the start.
Thank you very much, Clifford. Really nice having you.